Greetings, brothers and sisters. Now, JoJo Maghoul has just been caught lying and being deceptive by me here. Or he caught himself. One of my viewers sent me something. And so I went and did a little extra research. And I have it, right? Him getting caught lying back in this town hall. And I knew he was lying at the time, but I didn't say anything about it because there's so much more going on there that I covered. There was all these things to point out. But I'm glad to go back there and show you how he's being completely deceptive about something that is kind of important. And that's the other piece. Some lies aren't, don't have as much, can't do as much damage as other ones. And not like it's going to make any difference and the media's going to cover it and anybody's going to care. But let's do it anyway because it'll be fun and funny.
The first thing I want to ask you is what's your reaction to that? But number two, if Republicans and Democrats can't come together, right, to investigate the biggest attack on our Capitol in 200 years, what makes you think that they can come together on anything?
These people. No, I mean it. I'm not being facetious.
He's not being facetious. He means it. No, he doesn't.
Facetious. Democrats and Republicans. I don't care if you think I'm Satan reincarnated.
So that's the thing that got the most play. It's later on in this segment where he's just out and out lying.
The fact is, you can't look at that television and say, nothing happened on the 6th. You can't listen to people who say this was a peaceful march. No, I'm serious. Think about it. Think of the things being said. I've been through the other end of this when the Democrats 35 years ago were way off to the other side. Think about it.
So I'm playing this so just everyone remembers the context of this because he's talking about this big event and then he's going to go into Russia and China and democracy and autocracy.
What you can do, though, what they can do is try to change the narrative and say, well, why wasn't Nancy Pelosi prepared? Why weren't the Democrats prepared?
He's completely lost. Like he looks lost when he's hearing the Don Lemon's questions. When Don Lemon's is the shining light of intelligence on stage, like Don Lemons is carrying this thing, right? He's so much sharper than JoJo, and he's Don Lemons.
They can say that, and you can make honest judgments about it. I sometimes get myself in trouble for what I'm about to say.
Lying.
Not that I ever get in trouble. As you've heard me say before, no one ever doubts I mean what I say. The problem is I sometimes say all that I mean. But all kidding aside, I have faith
Yeah, you're a big kidder.
in the American people. I really do, to ultimately get to the right place. And by the way, many times Republicans are in the right place.
And who's it to judge who's in the right place or not, right? Because, this is going to come down to the autocracy stuff, which he ended up lying about his meetings with Xi and Putin. And so that's going to come back to this. But he's talking about autocracy. And autocracy is when you're sure of what the right place is, what the right point of view is. And again, if you're right, that's one thing. But if you're not right, like in JoJo's case, then that becomes, autocracy, right? That becomes somebody forcing their worldview on everybody else. And that's what's happening right now in America.
I don't mean that it's only the Democratic point of view, but some of the stuff, QAnon, the idea that the Democrats or the Biden is hiding people and sucking the blood of children no, I'm serious. Now, you may not like me, and that's your right. Look, it's a simple thing. You can walk out and say, I just don't like the way that guy wears his tie. I'm voting against him. You have a right to do that. You have a right to do that.
He doesn't put on his own tie.
But the kinds of things that are being said of late, I think you're beginning to see some of and by Democrats as well, sort of the venom sort of leak out of a lot of it. We got to get beyond this. What do you say to your grandchildren or your children about what's happening?
I don't know. Stay away from JoJo Maghoul, right? I can't believe I missed that the first time. I mean, that's what everyone should tell their kids and grandkids. Yeah, stay away from that creepy sniffling, snoozing, snuffleupagus MNFer, right? I'm starting to slip. I should have. I played this 3 times and I only finally got it.
Do you ever remember a time like this before?
So he's talking about the fracture, the schism, which, the year of the schism in America. And then he's going to, bring about this idea of autocracy.
In the entire history, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, this is not who we are. And I'll say one last thing. I've had a lot of experience internationally. And I mean that not good or bad, just I have. I've chaired the Foreign Relations Committee. I've been deeply involved. I did national security for the administration with Barack. But folks, the rest of the world's wondering about us. Those of you who travel abroad, not a joke. Not a joke. You asked, when I went to this G7, all the major democracies, I walked in, and I know a lot of them because of my role in the past. And they walk in, and I said, America's back. And they go, I'm serious, heads of state. I give you my word as a Biden.
And then he's going to tell an epic lie here. And I can prove it's a lie. And it just sounds like a lie. You can, like it's just, listen about what he's about to say here.
And they go, I'm serious, heads of state. I give you my word as a Biden. I said, are you really back? I mean, how can we believe you, Joe?
You think the other leaders would say that, like, I talked about that before, but then these lies grow. Like, this is the beginning of a bad lie. Heads of state said, are you really back, Joe? Joe, are you really back? Like, we believe you, Joe. And, I covered the G7. We all saw it. We saw the way the leaders were reacting to him. Like, he was talking out of turn and blurting things out. And, there was a time that Boris Johnson had to, like, settle him down. And, he was just failing on every level. And you could see that they were all like, oh, my God, this guy's senile, right? The other leaders, like, and he's just clueless. He has no idea what's going on there. You could see it over and over again. It wasn't like, hard to see. He was lost like he is now. Look at him here, right? The guy's lost most of the time. And he's just, having these fantastical memories where he's, fantasizing about what he thought happened. Or just, he's always been a liar, and his grasp of reality now has faded.
But will the country ever get it together? I talked to Xi Jinping in China, who I know well. We don't agree on a lot of things. He's a bright and really tough guy. He truly believes that the 21st century will be determined by oligarchs. I'm not a joke. Democracies cannot function in the 21st century.
So Xi Jinping said to you, democracies can't function in the 21st century. That's the first huge lie. Like, he's saying that Xi Jinping said to him, guess what, Joe? I think you're back. I don't know you're back. Are you really back, Joe? Joe, are you back? Joe? And then he said, guess what? Democracies are over. Democracies can't function in the 21st century. That's what he said to you? Like, you honestly saying that the leader of the second most powerful country went to you and said to you, hey, guess what? Democracies are over. We need to have autocracy. We need to have dictatorship. That's what he said to you. Really? That's a conversation you're saying? I mean, it just sounds like complete BS. And I can show you it is now.
The argument is because things are moving so rapidly, so rapidly, that you can't pull together a nation that is divided to get a consensus on acting quickly. So autocrats, autocracies. I had a long meeting with Putin, and I know him well. These guys actually are betting, I'm not joking, on autocracies. Democracy has to stand up and demonstrate and get something done. It's not just...
So they told you they're betting against democracy.
I'm not joking, on autocracies. Democracy has to stand up and demonstrate and get something done. It's not just important that I really mean... Democracy
has to stand up and get something done. So here's the problem with this, right? Here's a problem with JoJo's story. Again, just caught completely lying. Conveniently lying, because this is one of his talking points. This is a talking point he's been pushing out there ever since January 6th, long before the G7. This is something that he thinks is a winning talking point for him. His political strategists are saying democracy has to be saved, and he campaigned on it. This is from February 19th, 2021, so before the G7. So these guys conveniently, Xi Jinping and Putin conveniently gave JoJo one of his talking points, right? They told him something, like he says in a private conversation, that goes with this talking point, and he said it over and over again.
We are in the midst of a fundamental debate about the future and direction of our world. We're at an inflection point between those who argue that given all the challenges we face, from the fourth industrial revolution to the global pandemic, that autocracy is the best way forward, they argue.
So he's saying in this speech that autocracy is the best way forward. One of my viewers sent me this, and then I did some research and found that he's been saying this all along. But then he comes out and says, Putin and Xi Jinping told me this in private conversations, that autocracy was the only way, conveniently giving him his talking point. That's a lie, right? That's a political lie. They wouldn't say that, right? They wouldn't say that on their own. And it's a convenient, like them saying to him, hey, Joe, our two biggest threats say to him, hey, Joe, democracy's over, buddy. Listen to this MNFer.
That autocracy is the best way forward, they argue. And those who understand that democracy is essential to meeting these challenges. Historians are going to examine and write about this moment as an inflection point, as I said. And I believe that every ounce of my being that democracy will and must prevail. We must demonstrate that democracy can still deliver for our people in this changed world. Democracy doesn't happen by accident.
It doesn't happen by accident. You got to do something. So this is his talking point. And then he comes out and lies and said Xi Jinping and Putin said just the opposite. And that didn't happen. Like, this is him getting caught lying again. Like, he just does this all the time. Like, conveniently, I don't know what, how well his brain's working, or it's just an out, deception on his part. But either way, they didn't say that to him. Why would they? They don't have dementia.
We have to defend it, fight for it, strengthen it, renew it. We have to prove that our model isn't a relic of history. It's the single best way to revitalize the promise of our future.
So here he is doing the presidential address to Congress.
And as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy.
Remember? They're masking it up. I'm going to be masking it up again.
Remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of
the democracy survived. So it's important to understand what's being said here, because this is shortly after January 6th, and this is the way they decided to politicize this. This was their political talking points, that on January 6th, and because of Trumpers and extreme Republicans, and nothing to do with Antifa or extreme Democrats, only extreme Republicans threatened democracy with what they were doing, because they were trying to overturn the vote, and Trump was trying to overturn the election results, that democracy was threatened by autocracy, and Trump trying to be an autocrat, and that Xi Jinping and Putin both loved seeing this and thought this was a sign that democracy was ending and there was going to be autocracy. And so he is pitching autocracy here as a possibility, And every time this subject comes up, this is what he's been told to say. And then he just, botched it at the town hall with Don Lemons because he was saying, well, I talked to these guys and this is what they think. And again, he doesn't communicate very well. But what he's saying there is they just told him autocracy is the future and democracy's dead. But he'd been saying it all the way back in February.
Whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity?
Created equally in the image of God? Where'd you get that part? Created equally in the image of God. Google that and see what you come up with.
Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't.
Is he saying they're betting we can't? And that's before he met with Putin. This is, Joker smile here. Before he met with Xi Jinping and Putin on the G7. And this is all the way back this is on April 28th. And the G7 wasn't until June. And he's saying it here.
Fears that have pulled us apart. America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage.
See, how do you know that? They haven't told you that, right? Like, how do you know? Like, what's your proof? You're just, how do you know what they feel and what they think? I mean, obviously, they believe in autocracy because of their government. And we don't have a real democracy anymore. We never really totally did. It's kind of a sham, right? All this stuff is a sham. Speaking of sham, there's Liz Cheney. But how does he know? He hasn't had that conversation that he says he has, a couple months later, right? 3 months later, 4 months later.
They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy.
And that only autocracy would win. That's what he's saying, And then they came back and said, yeah, we heard your speech and you're right, Joe, because that would be strategically good for them to do. Are you kidding me? Right? Like, he just doesn't even know anymore. And he's always been a liar. He's always done these things. He always just makes things up as he's talking. And then he, walks them back or pretends he didn't say something, but they're on video. We saw him do that. This was when he was being laughed at by Kamala. Cory Booker goes after JoJo Maghoul. And this is just a sign. This should have disqualified him for being president. Cory Booker is much sharper, everyone on the stage is, mentally than JoJo Maghoul, right? And so he goes after JoJo Maghoul on marijuana and saying Maghoul doesn't have authentic, he challenges his connection to the African-American community. And Maghoul goes and says this.
I thought you might have been high when you said it. and let me tell you, because marijuana in our country is already legal for privileged people. And the war on drugs has been a war on black and brown people. And so let me just say this. With more African Americans under criminal supervision in America than all the slaves since 1850, do not roll up into communities and not talk directly to issues that are going to relate to the liberation of children, because there are people in Congress right now that admit to smoking marijuana, while there are our kids are in jail right now for those drug crimes. And so these are the kind of issues that mean a lot to our community. And if we don't have somebody authentically, we lost the last election. Let me just give you this data example. We lost in Wisconsin because of a massive diminution, a lot of reasons, but there was a massive diminution in the African-American vote. We need to have someone that can inspire, as Kamala said, to inspire African-Americans to the polls at record numbers.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Vice President Biden, you can respond to that.
I'll be very brief. Number one, I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period. And I think
Period.
anyone who has a record should be let out of jail, their records expunged, it be completely zeroed out. But I do think it makes sense, based on data, that we should study what the long-term effects are for the use of marijuana. That's all.
Because we don't know. There's never been any studies. We have no idea what happens if you smoke pot for a long time. Nobody knows. No stoner knows. You can't even go ask a stoner or the stoner's family what happens when you smoke pot for a long time. We have no idea. We should study it. I don't know. I think we should just study it. We should study water and what water does for a person's body, right? Food. What happens when you eat food? Like, we don't even know these things. Where's science when you need them?
All it is. Number one, everybody gets out, record expunged. Secondly, I'm part of that Obama coalition. I come out of the black community in terms of my support. If you notice, I have more people supporting me in the black community that have announced for me because they know me. They know who I am. 3 former chairs of the Black Caucus, the only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate.
So he just said the only African-American woman who ever been elected to the U.S. Senate. And he's then not talking about Kamala. And so Kamala starts to laugh, right? And so does Cory Booker, because there's actually 2 African-American women. And he said only, right? And then he's going to change it to first. You see him lying right on the spot. Like, we all just saw what he said. He said only.
Only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate. A whole range of people.
No,
my point is,
that's not true. The other one is here.
Then he gets confused, and now he's going to lie.
I said the first.
I said the first. You misheard, even though everyone else in the world heard only.
I said the first African-American elected.
He just lies right in the spot. Kamala's laughing.
First African-American. So my point is.
And so, think about that. Just caught right there, rearranging reality because he just loses it. Like, he can't follow his train of thought, but he's always been a liar. How quick he is to lie, right?
I'm serious. Heads of state. I give you my word as a Biden.
He gives his word as a Biden, like he's never been caught lying before, right? He literally, changed his family's history because he stole speeches from people when he was running for president. And he, the parts that he stole were talking about relatives, like working in the coal mines and things like that. And he didn't have anybody who did that. But when he gave the speech, he just made up relatives or made up jobs his relatives had, right? Just, blatantly lying and things that could be easily researched even back then before the internets. And he got, rolled. They, laughed him out of the presidential election because he's a liar, right? He just lies and lies and lies.
Setting out American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver.
So this is Jen Psaki, and it's June 3rd. So it's just, right before these meetings took place, right? The G7 is later on in June. And so this is what she had to say.
Europe trip, having these sit-downs with allies from NATO before Putin, is this meant to effectively project President Biden as a messenger of the West, not just the US, when he sits down with the Russian leader?
Well, I would first say that...
So he hasn't met with Putin, right? He's going to meet with Putin. So Putin hasn't told him yet, I'm betting on democracy failing and autocracy winning out. So this is the beginning of the G summit. He hasn't met with Ping. He hasn't met with Putin, Ping and Putin. Right? He hasn't met with either one of them. And so he's going to later say that when he met with them, like I showed you earlier a couple of times already, that when he met with them, they were saying how autocracy is the only way to go, and they're betting against democracy. And yet she and Biden multiple times were using these talking points before the G7 and before the meetings.
His commitment to attend the G7 and NATO predated the scheduling of the summit, just factually, as you all know. But I would certainly say thematically that what you'll see from the president and him talk about on this trip is his advocacy for democracy over autocracy, domestically here in the United States, but certainly around the world. And
so she's saying what his talking points are going to be, right? And conveniently, Xi Jinping and Putin are going to help him and tell him, you know, we've heard your talking points and your speeches, and we want you to know you're right. We are betting against democracy after January 6th and the divisions in your country. We're betting on autocracy, and we're betting against it. What? They would never say that, right?
I've known Xi Jinping for a long time. Allegedly, by the time I left office as vice president, I had spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader had. So I spent...
Why is he turning away from you, JoJo's got a smile, and Xi Jinping's like...
hours upon hours with him, alone with an interpreter, my interpreter and his, going into great detail. It's very, very straightforward. Doesn't have a democratic with a small d bone in his body.
Wait, did you just say Xi Jinping has a small d? Or he had a bone that was a small d in his body? What are you talking about, JoJo? What is it? Are you talking about him having a small d?
With a small d bone in his body. With a small d bone in his body. With a small d bone in his body. But he's a smart guy. He's one of the guys like Putin who thinks that autocracy is the wave of the future. Democracy can't function in an ever complex world.
No, they told you that, right? You know, you said you had this conversation.
Are you really back? I mean, how can we believe you, Joe, but will the country ever get it together? I talked to Xi Jinping in China, who I know well. We don't agree on a lot of things. He's a bright and really tough guy. He truly believes that the 21st century will be determined by oligarchs. I'm not a joke. Democracies cannot function in the 21st century, the argument is, because things are moving so rapidly, so rapidly, that you can't pull together a nation that is divided to get a consensus on acting quickly. So autocrats, autocracies. I had a long meeting with Putin, and I've continued. I know him well. These guys actually are betting, I'm not joking, on autocracies.
Are they, Joe? Are they betting against a democracy and an autocracy? You know, he's not joking. It's part of his talking points. So this is June 13th, the end of the G7 summit.
Global threats that is by working together and with our partners and our allies. And I conveyed to each of my G7 counterparts that the United States is going to do our part. America is back at the table.
America's back at the table. We walked away from the table with Trump's, but now we're back at the table.
As America's back at the table. I think we're in a contest, not with China per se, but a contest with autocrats, autocratic governments around the world, as to whether or not democracies can compete with them in the rapidly changing 21st century. And I think how we act and whether we pull together as democracies.
Pull together means that you go along and back your leader by choice as opposed to being forced by an autocracy. Going along with his agenda in a divided and, a complete schism is, there's just people on the right are never going to follow Joe Biden. And although, and people in the truth community as well, and there's other people as well, liberals who are, mad about what happened to Bernie, and they see through this stuff. And there's lots of people, about half the people or more, there's people who are just going to knuckle under because they just want things to get better. But then there's people who will just never follow Joe Biden. They just aren't accepting of him and these policies, the things that are going on right now. And he's saying here again, right, this is something, one of his major talking points, that it's a competition between autocracies and democracies.
Is going to determine whether our grandkids look back 15 years from now and say, did they step up? Are democracies as relevant and as powerful as they have been? And I walked away from the meeting with all of my colleagues believing that they are convinced that that is correct now too. Not, I shouldn't say now, not just because of me, but they believe that.
The colleagues are, because they've all been thinking about autocracies lately. European countries, England and France and all these other countries that were there. They were all contemplating autocracy. They were saying, maybe autocracies are better. Maybe we should just go with autocracies. Let's just scrap this whole democratic process. But then Joe Biden was elected and he showed up and they were like, hey, I think democracy actually works.
That to be the case. I propose that we have a democratic alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative, to Build Back Better. And they've agreed to that, and that's underway as the details of that. We agreed that we put together a committee to do that and come up with that. And thirdly, that we are going to insist on high standards for climate-friendly, transparent alternative.
High standards. They were going to go with low standards, but Joe Biden showed up, and he's like, no, let's go high standards, because low standards aren't as good as high standards. And so this guy just making things up as he goes along. There's no media fact-checking him. Like, he just got fact-checked, bro. He made up these talking points about a battle between autocracy and democracy, but what it really is democracy's failing right now. There's such a division, and whoever elected, the Democrats would never follow Trump, and the Trumpers and the Republicans are never going to follow Biden. I talked about this in my own divorce. When you're in a situation where the very concept of reality, right, your understanding of reality and what happened in events, right, like you go through something with some other person. And in divorce, it's more prevalent, but it could be, somebody you dislike and whatever it is, a coworker or something. But divorces are the worst. And your interpretation of events, your interpretation of January 6th, for example, or your interpretation of COVID, or your interpretation of what's happening, right? What our interpretation is, people who have our worldview, and we even, the difference between us and cubies. I mean, where the very fabric of reality, factual events that you just saw, is completely the schism between, this is why it's the year of the schism, between, what you see and what you experience and your memory of those events and your interpretation of why they took place and what happened and all these things is such a schism and a growing gap between what you see and what the people on the other side see. And when that happens, you can't even agree on, what's happening, right? Like JoJo Maghoul was saying, you saw what happened on January 6th. You can't deny that nothing happened. Well, there's, a complete different interpretation of events from people in the truth community and people on the right and Trumpers. And you're just saying you have to accept our reality. There's no bridging the gap. There's no joint understanding of what we're seeing, right? It's like two people go see a movie and then they come out and it's like they've seen a different movie. They describe it to you and they're the story is so vastly different. And that's what's happened here. And that's what he's referring to. And that's why America, and like now we have like the Simone Biles stuff, right? And, like all these things where America's looking weaker and weaker. There's division. People aren't able to just perform. Leaders in the athletic world are, basically calling in sick and quitting at the most important time, right? Not showing up and all these things. That's what America looks like, a divided country that is, hobbling along. And, if we don't get it together and back their agenda, the agenda that needs to happen because everything's moving so quickly. That's what was being said here. This is, it would be scary if I didn't know, what was really coming, right? I mean, things are, coming down the pipe that are going to blow whatever's going on now away. I mean, things are going to get, real reels pretty soon, because now it's fake reels. Like now, this stuff is man-made, but there's real stuff, acts of God and nature that are coming that are going to make everyone forget about all this other stuff. A couple of more things here.
If you have a piece of crack cocaine.
So someone put together this great compilation. It's got an old Senator, JoJo Maghoul, and he's coming in hard on crack addicts, and he's lecturing these people on how tough they should treat people who smoke crack. And then they have video of Hunter Biden smoking crack. I'm going to cut out the part where Hunter Biden's smoking crack, so just so you can see JoJo, because YouTube would call it promoting dangerous acts, so I can't show you that part, but you can find this video somewhere on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or something. Multiple people sent me this. So let's go through what JoJo's saying here.
If you have a piece of if you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, $1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice.
So we know that Hunter Biden smokes crack because he wrote a whole book about it and went on Jimmy Kimmel and talked about it extensively. I watched the interview, and he smoked crack for 10 or 15 years. I mean, just, long drug use. And Joe Biden wanted a mandatory 5-year sentence, which would mean Hunter Biden would be, an ex-convict right now. If it weren't for his white privilege and his political, his father's vice president privilege, Hunter Biden would be in jail based on Joe Biden's policies.
Under our forfeiture statutes, the government can, take everything you own. Everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you've just got caught engaging in. They can take everything. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society. They are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
So you're going to keep Hunter away from your family and his kids and grandkids and your dead son's widow who he was banging? Or what about the crackhead stripper baby when he was smoking crack and he impregnated a stripper named Dallas from Arkansas, and now there's a 2-year-old kid out there that's your grandchild that you won't acknowledge? I mean, think about what a horrible person Joe Biden is, right? I mean, it's just there ripe for the picking, but the mainstream media won't cover it. They just, won't talk about it. And this is hail in Italy. Things is going south weather-wise, and, you can say it's man-made stuff, whatever, sure. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Either way, these things are happening. The floods, the natural disasters, the schism, the division in countries, the forced agenda, all of it. Like things are, getting apocalyptic really quickly. So I have just a couple more brief points here. The first part is that, JoJo Maghoul saying that this is a battle between autocracy and democracy. Well, democracy's already done. I mean, they're forcing things on people. They're censoring them on, they're deplatforming people on the internet. I mean, there's so many ways that you can see that people are being pushed into a situation where they're forced to make decisions, right? I mean, they won't let people talk about things on social media, lots of things that are now banned. And, no one in the news or no scientists or no, celebrity are allowed to verbalize any dissent. There's just one opinion that's allowed. That's the only valid opinion. And everyone else is supposed to be shouted down and censored. And, all the corporations, all the powers that be are pushing this agenda. So there's no longer a democracy, right? I mean, that was a sham, everything that happened leading up to the election. Joe Biden basically being selected out of a sea of bad Democratic candidates, the media covering for him and all the rest, right? And so there's that. That is out there. And then there's no money. The economic system, the debt-based economic system, food crises, energy crises, all of these things. And what he's saying here, like JoJo's admitting that there is a call for autocracy because the world is so divided. And now with the internets, many people globally don't trust the governments, don't trust the UN, don't trust media more than anything else, don't trust big business, don't trust the banks, don't trust the finance companies, and don't trust science and or religion, right? So you have people who don't trust, majority of people don't trust one or more of the institutions. Some people don't trust any of them. And the powers that be aren't trying to win those people back. They're not addressing any of our concerns. They just laugh at any of our, whatever we might believe, right? And say that we're just ridiculous, gaslighting us, right? Saying that, we're paranoid or mentally ill or whatever it is. That we're the problem. They're fine. We're messed up, right? It's not me, it's you, right? So that's the attitude they're taking. So they're just pushing everybody away and using more force and using more pressure and coercion to get us to bend to their will, right? In a democracy, you have to win people over. In an autocracy, you just have to scare them, threaten them, bribe them, whatever it is. Get them to submit to your will, even if they don't want to. And just like so much in the political world and the media, JoJo's railing against autocracy with his words, but his actions are bringing about autocracy. Not just, not from him. He's not the autocrat, right? He's just the puppet. And so I read something from The Whispers of the Brighter World today. I'll leave a link in the top of the description box for those of you who are doing the heartfulness practice and want to receive these messages, these channeled messages from this French woman, mostly from Babaji. This is a message from Babaji dated Thursday, May 5th, 2016, 9 a.m. It was just, I think, a few weeks before the medium passed away. I believe the woman who was channeling these messages passed away in June, so this is interesting. But he says in the middle of the message, a wall of ignorance still separates humans from reality, which remains concealed for good reason, as it would not be used in the right way, namely to help humans advance. And so there's a lot of, I don't want to call them powers, but potential, hidden potential that human beings possess. But right now, we just don't have the maturity. Certainly the people who lead the world, but many other people, if they understood their true potential, if they understood the true nature of human life, and they were in touch with, more of their capacity, instead of using that for good, using that to advance the human species in a positive way and adhere and align ourselves with the will of the divine, we would use these things like what we've done with the combustion engine or guns, weapons, what we've done with nuclear power, create a situation, pollution, and the technological world where people are addicted. All the things that, all the stuff that we've created here based in the technological advancements we've had without spiritual maturity. And that's what the heartfulness system is to help the human race mature spiritually so that we can rise up in our capacity and we can fight off our lower tendencies and our addictions and things, that we would take these, these capabilities and use them in the wrong way. And I've talked about this quite substantially, the idea that this is an experimental planet and human beings have been born out of the current human beings that are on this planet. There's been different versions of humans on this planet. Like the true history has been blurred. I mean, all of it, right? And that's because right now we suck. It's just, you look around and no one can really debate that and with a straight face, or unless they're in complete denial. Human beings really suck, and we have exceeded our capacity. Our level of maturity, our level of wisdom is very low. But our technological advancements have risen substantially, and we're just doing damage to ourselves and the planet because we're not mature enough to handle that even. And there's so much more for us to evolve into on a spiritual level first, because otherwise we won't be able to handle the capacities, the hidden capacities, the latent capacities that are in our system. And so this is what the heartfulness system is for, is to help people rise up to these higher levels of functioning, but first mature spiritually and, have this deep connection with God so we won't go in the wrong direction. When we mature and we evolve and we open up some of our, hidden potential, we need to have the maturity to do the right thing and not abuse it, which we've, consistently done now, which I thought was, obvious, but it was nice to hear it. And, that's where we are. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.